You met participles in Chapter 7, so Chapter 14 doesn't hold anything particularly new for you, but in Chapter 7 you met them in a more limited fashion, and now that you've studied the third declension, you can meet the whole Greek participle. It is probably the most useful part of the Greek verb, so it is something to pay attention to because you will use them again and again and again. This chapter is going to be divided into two videos, the first on the form and the second on how you might use it. To recap, the basic idea of a participle. The term participle falls into the category of mood. It's a linguistic mood, in the same category therefore as indicative, imperative, infinitive. They are verbal adjectives. That means that the idea of it, meaning as it were, comes from the verbal root, and there's going to be tense, voice and number, so present, active, singular. It is, however, also an adjective because it describes a noun, and as an adjective it needs to have case, gender and number. That leads to a lot of different categories, so it's probably the most copious part of the Greek verb to have to parse. But if you remember these two categories of verbal morphological categories and adjectival ones, you'll see where it all comes from. And they do, of course, overlap in the term number. What you've learned so far has been relatively limited. You've learnt only masculine nominative forms. Singular and plural. And you've learnt luon, luontes in the active, and luomenos, luomenoi in the middle. And then for the aorist, you needed to put in the sigma, and indeed I would argue the alpha, so we'll put those both in orange. And then you're back to the standard participle endings. Lusas, lusentes, lusamenos, lusamenoi. Those are the only forms of the participle you've met so far. The active ones in Chapter 7, the middle ones in Chapter 8. What we need to do now is look at the whole lot. I've given you just the present active because once you've got this, then the problems largely disappear. You've met luon, luontes. This is a third declension word, so the next important thing is the genitive, luontos. That tells you the stem is going to change from an omega and a single nu to ont, omicron, nu, tau. And once you've got that stem change, the rest of it should become fairly obvious. Luonta, luontis, luonti, luontes, luontas, luonton. And then you're going to have the same problem of mixing various vowels together that you get with your third declension words in general. You'll end up with luusi there, and that comes from luontsi. But you might remember the Greek is very uncomfortable with that kind of combination of letters, and so it contracts down. Neuter is going to be very similar. Luon, luon, luontos, luonti, luonta, luonta, luonton, luusi. You've still got the neuter being the same in the nominative and accusative. The plural nominative and accusative ending in alpha. Otherwise it agrees with the masculine. You've still got a genitive plural that ends in omega nu. So the sort of features you're used to seeing in your paradigms are still there on the stem nt. Remembering that at nt harks back to the nt in present. Feminine is a bit different. You've now got luusa, luusan, lu u ses, lu u se, lu u sai, lu u sas, lu u son, lu u sais. You might recognise this. What you've got here is a 3-1-3 paradigm. So the masculine and neuter follow the third declension. The feminine follows the first declension, because in the third declension there is no difference between masculine and feminine, so you couldn't have separate masculine and feminine endings. So this is going to take the same kind of idea as pas, passa, pan. 3-1-3 adjectives, and that's why they're introduced along with the third declension in chapters 12 and 13. So as long as you can remember luon, luusa, luon, and the stem change to luontos, there are no new endings here, just a new formulation. The aorist does a very similar thing. You have your sigma and your alpha, same for the middle, and then lusas, lusasa, lusan. And what's important then is the genitive, lusantos, lusases, lusantos. Once you know the genitive, you know it's again a 3-1-3 adjective, like pas, passa, pan, and you know what's going to happen throughout the paradigm. So learn pas, passa, pan, and you're fine on the aorist, and you've got the basic idea for the present active. The active participles need a little bit of thought because of their mixing declensions. The middle ones are blissfully simple. Luomenos, luomener, luomenon. Lusamenos, lusamener, lusamenon. It's a standard first and second declension word, following the same pattern you've seen for the nouns so far. So middle participles are very easy to handle. Active ones take a little bit of thought and applying that 3-1-3 pattern. There are no new endings here for you to think about. I'll repeat that. You do know all the endings already, but you are having to reconfigure them for a new part of the verb.